Is that a guitar?
How many hours a day do you practice?
Do you make your own reeds?
Like, are you good?
The next question is, do you like to practice together?
Do we? We do.
We've been exploring the world of oboe-cello duos this year, and I am the only musician he can play with, and basically vice versa. So, yes. Sometimes it's a little vulnerable to practice together, but it is enjoyable.
It is fun. Yeah, we have a built-in duo in our marriage, which is a nice bonus. And especially during the COVID times that have been the past year. Like she said, that's been our chamber music, has been playing with each other. So that's been fun. We enjoy it.
How long does it take to learn a new piece of music?
It's a good question. It's a tricky question because I think it varies. For instance, if I'm learning a cello part for an orchestra piece, but the orchestra piece is pretty straightforward, just not that difficult a part, it might not take me super long. It might take me a few hours to learn that part, which might involve just scanning through for the most difficult parts and figuring out fingerings. If it's something much more difficult though, and especially if it's a solo piece where it's all you, that might take weeks, at least, depending on the piece. If I'm preparing a new piece for a recital, it's probably months of preparation of, starting from the ground of I've never played this before ever, learning the piece, and then gradually polishing it and getting it ready, probably months. When did you start learning your instrument?
I started oboe when I was 10.
I started playing cello when I was 4.
You win.
It's not a competition. Are your parents musicians? Yeah, this is a common question, and this is kind of a fun question. Some people come from very musical families, and some people they got into music without music being in their family at all. And some are somewhere in between.
My dad is a professional musician. He plays the trumpet, and he is a trumpet professor and wind band conductor. So I definitely think I got my musical genes from him. But my mom is also musical. She would not consider herself a musician, but she helped us practice growing up and taught us the basics of music theory, and so she's kind of the family manager.
And you have 2 siblings that are in music?
Yes, both of my siblings are string players as well.
And my family is a little bit different in that neither of my parents are musicians. At some point, they developed a love for music, and so they had me and all my siblings grow up doing music lessons of various kinds. So piano, organ, cello, violin, flute. So I did grow up with music in the home and doing musical things, even though my parents are not musicians. So you're a musician, and that's like your job. How do you make a living?
Touche.
It's a common question. It's a good question.
Well, I play the oboe in a military band, so that is my full-time job. I am in the Air Force, and being a military musician is my job. And that's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. There are many different ways that professional musicians make a living. One route is if you're in a full-time orchestra, that would be your full-time income. Although I would say a lot of musicians in full-time orchestras are still doing other things. Like they might still have a studio that they teach. They might still teach part-time at a school, or do just various and sundry other projects outside of their orchestra job. You could teach full-time at a university or music school. You could be a freelancer, which is a very broad term. That might be like teaching a studio, doing just various gigs that you get hired for. It might be doing studio recording. There are some places like Nashville, I've heard string players talk about. They have a huge amount of work of just doing studio recording for other recording artists, for composers for TV shows, movies, things like that. Some people take classical instruments like cello, I would consider a classical instrument, and take it into other genres, bluegrass or alternative folk or rock or whatever, and make a living that way.
So how do you make a living?
I make a living combination of freelancing things right now. So teaching cello, recording, doing a lot of recording this year for various projects. In normal times, there would be gigs playing with different orchestras in the area, playing for special events. I am the music leader at our church, so that's part of my income. And we've also been doing regular live stream concerts, and we make some income from those as well. So you play music, but like what's your real job? Just don't ask that question. Did you always know you wanted to be a musician?
It's been a process. But I think being musical or playing the oboe was something that always kind of stood out as what my most obvious skill was, and I just kind of kept following that path, and here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, I would say no, I didn't always know that I wanted to be a musician. I wasn't like Yo-Yo Ma, who like had a premiere as a 7-year-old, I think with Bernstein conducting or something crazy.
Welcome, Yo-Yo Ma.
Not me. You know, as most kids do, I did a lot of things growing up, which included music, and gradually music just kind of won out. Like, music kind of took the forefront of what I did, what I enjoyed the most, what I was best at, and then through that, gradually cello won out as the thing that I enjoyed most and was best at. So it really wasn't until high school that I got serious about playing cello, playing chamber music, and decided to pursue it for school and a career.
How do you memorize music?
That's a good question. I feel like we get asked this one pretty regularly after concerts. There are different ways to memorize music. For some things, you might not ever memorize the music, like orchestra. If you're playing in an orchestra, you wouldn't memorize that. For certain things like solo, Bach, that is commonly memorized for cellists. So, different things. But if I'm teaching a student how to memorize music, I try to get them to work on it in different aspects. So one is aural memory. So what does it sound like? If you don't have it in your ear, then you're not gonna be able to remember it as you play. Another would be kinetic memory, or like muscle memory. It's like literally, what are my fingers doing? How are my arms moving at different points in the piece? So you memorize it by what it feels like. Another one is like theoretical memory, like conceptual memory. So if you really know the piece, you might know that there are 3 sections, and the first and the third section are similar, but the third section changes at this key point. So if I'm in the middle of playing through a Bach movement, I might remember like, oh yeah, this is just like the beginning, but I have to hit this chord instead of that chord, and that takes me like on a left turn to the end, kind of thing. Oh, visual is the other one. So some people have a really strong visual memory where they can literally imagine that they're on the 5th measure of the 3rd line of the 7th page of whatever they're playing. And they can literally track, imagine it visually.
Yeah.
So visual memory can get tricky though, because if you get used to a certain layout on the page and you play a different edition that's laid out differently, it can mess with you a little bit. Someone said people ask them frequently, what's your day-to-day as a musician? I do feel like the lives of classical musicians are somewhat mysterious.
As an oboist, I try to schedule out not only time for practicing oboe, but also for reed making. I think it's important for us as musicians to take care of our bodies. So we always try to schedule in a little bit of yoga, a little bit of exercise, just to keep all of our, especially as a cellist, it's very athletic.
Very athletic.
But there's always some desk work associated with being a musician, probably especially for you. Invoices, scheduling lessons.
Yep. Yeah, any freelancer that involves you're like your own manager, so you have to do all that kind of desk work stuff yourself too.
I'm boring myself just talking about this.
So yeah, for me it's very similar. On any given day, might be teaching some lessons, practicing music for our next live stream concert, putting together songs for our church for the next week.
In non-COVID times, there are lots of rehearsals and then performances.
Yep. So we had one question asked to us that I thought was very thought-provoking. It is, what are some ideas to help keep the arts alive for public schools in rural areas? And as a follow-up question, are there after-school programs that could be used in a public school that we would recommend? It's a great question, and I would say probably a lot of schools are thinking along these lines that are not even in rural areas this year because of the pandemic. But especially for rural areas, I think the arts are just as important for those areas and those schools. I don't think I have specific curriculum or programs that I could offer, but the internet is a very powerful thing. And while it can never replace real interactions in teaching or performing, it can still be incredibly helpful, especially in these scenarios. So I would say, like, if you're looking at a music program in a rural public school, make sure they are able to experience real concerts in some way. For instance, the Berlin Philharmonic has a video archive that you can subscribe to of their past concerts. So you can sit down and plug it into good speakers for the class, or if they're at home, suggest that they use headphones. They can get the best sound that they can, and you can sit down and experience a real concert that really happened. Or if the schedule works out, catch a live stream concert. There are tons of orchestras now. Their only thing they're doing is live stream performances. So you can do real musicians playing in real time. I think that's important. Similarly, there's so many educational resources online. I'm more familiar with the cello ones. Like there's a cellist, Johannes Moser, who's like an international soloist, and he has a big online presence. He has a YouTube channel, not only full of his performances, but all kinds of cello tutorials. He'll walk you through technique and even through certain passages of cello repertoire. My teacher from NEC, Paul Katz, has this entire website community he built called Cello Bello, and they have a huge archive of cello lessons and cello master classes. A lot of them would be approachable at various levels. So things like that could be really useful.
I think private lessons are more accessible than they've ever been. Most private lesson teachers are teaching both. If they're not teaching in person, they're teaching online. So maybe a few years ago it wouldn't have been very common for lessons on any instrument to be available in a rural area, but now you can make sure that all of the students who want to take private lessons are connected with a really, really good teacher online.
The only other thought I have on that question is, if I was a teacher in those schools, I would also try to work in as many local art elements as I could. So if there were, even though you're a rural area, if you have local visual artists or local musicians, see if you can involve them in some way, even if it's virtual right now. I think that could be a really important thing to not only share with the school internationally renowned musicians like the Berlin Philharmonic from across the world, but also like, oh, these are the musicians that are in our town doing these things. I think that would be really good too. Hey, thanks so much for watching our 2 videos on musician frequently asked questions. If you have more questions for us that we didn't answer, let us know and you can bet we'll answer them for you. More videos to come soon on this YouTube channel here. See you then.